So the most exciting thing about doing this service every year where someone from the congregation, someone or someones from the congregation give us a challenge to perform in a service is that I know that not only will I get to have the fun of working with it, it's kind of like the only UU lectionary that we have, but I will also have the amazing talents of so many other people. So I just want to take a moment and thank everybody who gave us their interpretation of fishing, including all of our musicians and my dear colleague. Some of you know we'll have a very limited amount of Jim Lewis and Rodney Lemery's time this year. I just want to say there are very few people that can go from doing a prayer to singing, Dr. John. So let's say thank you to Jim. So we do this service every year, and I hope that this has got you thinking about what topic you might decide to try to put us up to for next year. But when I got to talk to Leslie right after she had won this and went up to congratulate her and, of course, thank her for the donation that meant that she was the winner. I said, well, we should get together and we can talk about what the topic is. And she said, oh, no, I have one. Fishing. And if you've talked to Leslie when she's definite, you're just like, okay, that's good. Good, we got that one. But all I could think about in that moment was, well, number one, of course, because that would make sense for Leslie. And number two, all I could think about was that time when I was 9 years old and I didn't go fishing with my uncle the third time, because the third time you had to put the worm on the hook yourself. And I was like, no, not doing that. I did end up going fishing many times after that. And truthfully, though, the temptation was to use this as a time to just tell, fish stories. Really big, untrue stories. I decided not to do that. Probably not good. But what became clearer as I thought about this, trying to go through my own experience with fishing, with fish, most of my experience with fish actually had to do with being a small child that really wanted a pet and a mother who really didn't want a pet as a single mother, and so, which is a perfectly normal thing and understandable, but going to a fair back when this was allowed and throwing a ping pong ball into a small bowl and winning a fish, a goldfish, and bringing it home and putting it in my room, which then became a kind of ongoing thing where I would always have a fish in my room. I also briefly had a ladybug, but that didn't go very well. So anyway, so I started thinking about all these ways that we could talk about fishing, and I realized that though there's sort of a quality to this particular sermon every year, it's sort of a stump the minister ethic, What became clear as I reflected on this over the months, and I really truly have on this one, I've reflected on it since last November, is that fishing is kind of a dream topic for preaching. It will be a hard one to land, though, so here we go. Okay. I'm prepared. Leslie, right? Okay. All right, just checking. Okay, so in Robert Redford's movie, A River Runs Through It, the book's author, Norman MacLean, is quoted as saying, eventually all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river is cut by the world's great flood, and it runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of those rocks are timeless raindrops, and under those rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. Fishing, I've come to realize as I've reflected on it over these days, is really about the continuity of life. It's about those interconnections, the net of belonging, you might say, that we cannot deny in these times. It's about the need we have to be in the presence of something that is larger than we are. Fishing is about patience and perseverance, and Leslie will quickly add that it's not really about catching fish. Fishing is about the family connections, the stories which run through our lives, and it came down to Leslie through her family, through the matrilineal line, as they say, in other words, her mother. And we have a beautiful piece of art on our cover. I invite you to take look at Carol's artwork. This is Carol Baxter, Leslie's mom's art is gorgeous. And we also have a few words of wisdom in this video.
Go.
I'm not prepared.
Well, what do you have in your hand there?
Oh, this is my dad's fishing creel, and it's pretty old and beat up, but it's sacred.
Oh, what's sacred about it?
Huh?
What's sacred about it?
Oh, it's been through a lot. I mean, they put grass in it and then put your trout in, keep them fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I did a painting of it too.
Yeah, I remember that painting. I had it hanging in my law office when I was corporate, and it kind of helped to ground me.
All right.
Yeah. Neat. I'm so glad you still have that. It's a beaut.
A little dusty,
Yeah.
but it served its purpose.
Yeah.
And you can't buy things like this now.
No.
No, it's made of wicker. It's wicker and leather. Nice stitching on it. Probably done by hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a antique.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Kind of like us.
Good.
Go.
Thank you. Thank you to Carol, who's with us this morning. Baseball, you know, is billed as the national sport. I've been thinking, now that I've been thinking about fishing all summer, that maybe it should be fishing. Fishing could be our national sport, because it seems like there is some tie with fishing in many, many people's histories. And after the first service, we heard many fish stories, didn't we, about fishing and fishes and everything. So we know that that's part of a lot of people's stories. My father and his brother, and then later the man who was to marry my aunt, all learned to fish on the Great Lakes outside of Cleveland. And when my father was a child and my uncles were young, it was important to them because it was a place they could go that was large and expansive. It was something they could do that was just something that everyone did. And they could get away from the hatred and the other things they were encountering as people seen as immigrants in the community in which they were. So it was always an important piece of their lives. And in honor of this sermon, I actually did unpack a couple of the boxes that have been sitting in my garage since my father died. And they were the boxes of his fishing stuff. You should just be glad I didn't wear the waders. I apparently have 3 pairs, up the full hip waders, so 3 pairs. My father was just as much into researching the stuff and getting the absolutely best stuff as he was into the actual fishing. But he also loved the fishing. And just before and then after retirement, he and his friends from the university where he taught would charter a boat and go out fishing. And one of his favorite times with his grandson was the one time that they went fishing together, which has inspired an interest in his grandson in fishing in the future. Hence all that stuff in my garage, yes. But maybe for you, when you think about this continuity, this flow, this interconnection, it isn't fishing. Maybe like me, you're more drawn to the proximity to the water, just being by water, which I spent a lot of time in the last few months doing. Maybe it's another part of the natural world, hiking up in the mountains. Maybe it's just conversing with trees, or wondering at the vastness of what we know and the enormity of what we don't know. I think fishing is a proxy for all of that. And I think of the ways that sometimes we just need something that we can do, as Jim said, something active, an active meditation. And I think about my mentor and colleague, the Reverend David McPherson, now 91 years old, who after a long night at church, he told me, would come home and work into the wee hours of the morning, building intricate, tiny models of old New England meeting houses. He came from the Universalist tradition. And he wanted to build those models to remind himself, not just because it was a hobby, but he needed to do it as a meditation to remind himself of the tradition that he kept, even though perhaps the day-to-day expression in that meeting he had attended that night did not truly thrill his soul. We need constants, which remind us of the larger scope of life, family and tradition. Now, Leslie's mother, Carol, has been fishing since she was a girl, and she began when she was in high school at the creek outside of Reading. And As for Leslie's one brother, Leslie has two brothers, one of whom is here, but the brother that isn't here is not here because, as Leslie says, if you're going to see him, you're going to go fishing, right? Yes. So Leslie remembers being taught how to store tackle, how to bait a hook. She remembers that lovely antique wicker fish basket, and you may not have heard in the audio, but she said that the painting that her mother did was one that she had in her corporate office. It reminded and grounded her when she needed that as well. There is a quote from a man named Isaac Walton: "As no person is born an artist, so no person is born an angler." It's one of the axioms that he says. The book is called The Complete Angler, and it appears among people who fish to be one of those things you need to have said that you read. It's sort of like Robert's Rules of Order among certain religious orders. Everyone says they've read it, they claim knowledge, but very few have actually read the book. But fishing has been, for Leslie Baxter, almost all her life, that line, that particular touchstone. And she remembers, actually, which I love this image, she remembers studying, taking her law books to a bank and casting out a line and studying while fishing, multitasking even then. Leslie comes by this honestly. She says, "My mother has been fishing all her life," as she said, "but she will limit out," meaning she's caught as many fish as she's allowed legally to catch, "but some guy is going to come along and tell her that she isn't doing it right." This is probably not a big surprise to those of you who know Leslie Baxter, because for Leslie Baxter, she informed me, fishing is also about feminism. Women, she says in her best courtroom voice, declarative voice, women are better at fishing. The reasons, well, more observant, less showy, I heard that, amen. Note that 2 weeks ago when Leslie went fishing with her brothers on her one brother's boat, she was the first to land a very lovely salmon, which was quite something. Todd Moen has produced a short documentary. It's called The River of Life. And it traces the path of women who have or are battling breast cancer and who have found a healing meditation for themselves in fly fishing. One of them, Karen, says in the movie, "My first diagnosis was at 37, my kids were young, and my worry was how they were going to keep going. A couple years later, I found fly fishing, and that was my Zen place. It was my place to go so I didn't have to think about cancer." For Leslie Baxter, it's about the connection to life. And also, that's true for Karen. She says, if you know and if you're careful, you can release the fish to be caught another day. And one of the most beautiful things in this film is there are several scenes of the women gently putting the fish back into the water, holding the fish for a moment, watching them breathe, and then letting them go. That in itself is beautiful and tender and meditative. Fishing also gives that balm of engulfing silence and space to proud, self-declared introverts like Leslie Baxter. Barb, another woman in the film, says, "I just like the solitude. I'm kind of a quiet person. I like to be out in nature and enjoy it." Herbert Hoover was a little more blunt. He said, "There are only two occasions when Americans respect privacy, especially in presidents, and that is prayer and fishing." So fishing is really, truly, it's sort of like a prayer. It's a way to pay attention. It's mindfulness. Reading the water is an art, paying attention to what the bugs are doing, what they're eating, what the fish are eating. And despite the bravado in those stories that we hear about the one that got away, fishing reminds its acolytes of something beyond achievement. You can have a great day fishing, says Leslie Baxter, and never catch a fish. Fishing is about hope, says Barb, whose cancer has returned in the film, and she's talking about that. The reward is always there. The film, which features Oregon rivers, speaks about hard facts, such as the one that 1 in every 8 women in our nation has cancer, about the fact that 40% of the native fish in the Pacific Northwest are now endangered. Barb says she thinks there's a connection between these two things and about our disregard, our lack of attention for the earth in which we live. And she says, fishing brings her that larger hope. Fishing allows us to grasp the larger forces in life. It allows us to ask a question that theologian Bernie Loomer used to ask in his later years to people. He was a member of our sister congregation in Berkeley, and he used to ask people in an adult faith development class after church, he'd say, "What is the size of your soul? What is your soul's ability to grow and expand and to stretch when life throws contradictions at you?" Size was the defining concept in Loomer's spirituality. He always wrote that word, S-I-Z-E, with all capital letters and dashes in between the letters to try to give a sense of the spaciousness he intended by using that word. He describes the concept this way: by size, I mean the stature of a person's soul, the range and depth of your love and your capacity for relationships. I mean the volume of life you can take into your being and still maintain your integrity and individuality, the intensity and variety of outlook you can entertain in the unity of your being without feeling defensive or insecure. I mean the strength of your spirit to encourage others to become freer in the development of their diversity and uniqueness. I mean the power to sustain more complex and enriching tensions. I mean the magnanimity of concern to provide conditions that enable others to increase their stature. That largeness, that size. In the movie, The River Runs Through It. You see this in the character of the rebellious younger son, Paul. He's a charming, charismatic, risk lover whose day-to-day life has much to fear and who sometimes in his risk-taking endangers those around him in very perilous ways. He is, as the movie unfolds, you learn, an alcoholic, a compulsive gambler. And his minister father tries very hard to ignore the rumors he hears about his younger son who still lives in town. Yet Paul is also an amazing fisherman. And when the early scenes of the movie flash, you see Paul saying to his older brother Norman that when he grows up, he's going to fish for a living. Norman informs him that that is not a career he can have. And yet, when Paul knows that other people in the family need something, he takes them to the Church of the River for the family's other form of prayer. It has been said some go to church and think about fishing. Others go to fishing and think about God. But engagement with the large, praying for resources beyond ourselves, we all need these in these asking days, as our hymn said. Fishing gives us a window into the kind of change we are experiencing, which makes it necessary sometimes for us to remember what in our lives has size and spaciousness and solitude. Leslie Baxter says that when she goes fishing, she can see the impacts that humans are having on the environment. She's seen it even within her lifetime. She remembers surf fishing on beaches that then have now been overrun by dune buggies. She remembers an abundance of fish in the rivers and the seas, which all who fish, she says, now know are no longer there. Every good fisher person knows not to take more than you need, she says. Everyone who fishes is at some level a conservationist. I want to thank Leslie for her generosity to the church. I want to thank her family for being here this morning and for their contributions to raising her up so that we could have this meditation. Leslie has given so much to this congregation in so many ways. But this gift of reminding us of all the ways that we all need to stay grounded, all the ways we need to have those places where we can actually let our minds drift, where we can find that right mix for us all, and it's different for each of us, of challenge and comfort, where we can do something that's truly not about winning, that's mostly about being. For the quality of attention, for the constancy and size, for the ability to keep hope afloat, a larger hope, for being hooked into things that are beyond us and that we hope will carry beyond us after us. May we pay attention to what is dancing on the waters before us, appreciate the miracles of life, the small ones, through our contact with its harvest. May we take out our wearied souls into the solace of solitude and be grateful for the many ways we are all connected to one another and to all life on this one precious planet, which is our world. And may we remember that there is a river that flows on in our souls. Thank you.